Today we will talk about energy reactions and redox reactions. We will talk about how living organisms perform work, and your textbook shows animal like this one, diagram like this one, and what they are trying to show you is that living organisms require an energy and they get it from outside. In this case, the carbohydrates that are full of energy from the grass, they are eaten by this animal, and in the stomach they are turned into glucose, and that glucose, it will be digested and it will break chemical bonds, form new chemical bonds to produce energy. And this will happen over and over in living organisms. One organism is going to eat another one, while the other one is going to eat the other one. And I want that you watch a video that is in your textbook that describes this in a lot of detail. But I want, before watching the video, I want that you remember that first, living organisms require energy from outside sources, and second, that some animals obtain energy by eating plants, and some feed on other organisms that eat the plants. And in the video, they will show you all these different cycles that they form and how all the chemical bonds are broke and reform each time that one animal eat another one or one living organism eat another one.
Could a carbon atom that was once part of Albert Einstein be in you? All living things need to take in carbon-containing molecules to fuel their activity and build their cells. This is true for busy students and for all organisms. Let's look at how carbon atoms move through the carbon cycle in the Arctic tundra. Carbon atoms from carbon dioxide are incorporated into living things by producers, such as this plant. Carbon dioxide enters a leaf, moves into a cell, and goes into a chloroplast. There, in the process of photosynthesis, carbon dioxide is used to make sugar molecules. The sugars can be used to build larger carbon-containing molecules, carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. In this way, carbon that was in the air is now part of the plant. When a plant is eaten by an herbivore, or primary consumer, carbon in plant tissue enters the primary consumer's digestive system. There, plant molecules are broken down. These small molecules are then used by the primary consumer to make larger molecules for building its own tissues. In this way, some of the carbon that was in a plant becomes carbon in a primary consumer. Similarly, when a primary consumer is eaten by a higher-level consumer, some of the carbon in the primary consumer is incorporated into the higher-level consumer. Carbon-containing molecules in dead plant material, animal feces, and dead organisms are taken up by decomposers, such as fungi and bacteria. Decomposers break down these materials and incorporate some of the carbon atoms into their own bodies. We have now seen how carbon moves from carbon dioxide to producers, to primary consumers, to higher-level consumers, and to decomposers. How does carbon get back to the atmosphere? During cellular respiration, carbon-containing molecules are broken down, and ATP is made. Carbon dioxide is released as a byproduct and returned to the atmosphere by producers, consumers, and decomposers. Overall, this return of carbon dioxide by cellular respiration is closely balanced by its removal from the atmosphere through photosynthesis. The global carbon cycle involves living things on land and in rivers, lakes, and oceans. And, by the way, considering the huge number of carbon atoms in each person and how quickly carbon atoms move through the carbon cycle, there is almost certainly a little of Einstein in each of us.
So as you watch in the video, different organisms use different energy sources, and based on the energy sources, they can be divided into groups: autotroph and heterotroph. The autotroph are the ones that create their own food in some way. So here are all the plants, algae. We'll show more examples in a second. And the heterotrophs are the ones that need to eat other organisms. So for example, humans, we're eating the cow, and the cow is eating the grass. So these two are heterotroph, while the grass and the flowers will be autotroph. There are many examples of autotroph, from big trees to microscopic organisms such as algae. And remember, there are many examples of algae in the ocean, and they're very important because they produce most of the photosynthesis, most of the oxygen of the planet. So these plants make their own food through a process called photosynthesis, so they sustain themselves. And in addition to that, they take CO2 and produce glucose. So to finish, so I told you about the photosynthesis, and the second thing that is important is they don't usually consume organic compounds derived from other organisms. Heterotrophs, on the other hand, are consumers that feed on plants, other animals, or they compose different organic molecules. And with Rachel, in ecology, you will study this in much more detail. In this slide, we will study how the energy flow in an ecosystem. And the first step that I want that you see is that there is a constant recycling of energy. But how the energy goes inside of the ecosystem and how the energy leaves. So here, the energy flows in the ecosystem in a form of light and leaves in a form of heat. So this is the first step, how the energy goes inside and how the energy goes outside. The second thing that I want that you remember is that if you see this graph, the second step is photosynthesis. So the plants, the autotroph, they use this sunlight to turn this solar energy into chemical energy, and in particular, they are able to produce all oxygen, and this oxygen is going to use during cellular respiration of plants and animals. So they use the mitochondria to generate ATP, to generate energy, and that energy will power most of the cellular work. So let's recap. I told you three things. The first thing that I told you is that in an ecosystem, the energy flows into the ecosystem in the form of sunlight and live in the form of heat. So sunlight and live in the form of heat. The second thing that I told you is that photosynthesis generates organic molecules and oxygen that will power the cellular respiration. And finally, that the cell use chemical energy to store inorganic molecules that generate ATP, and those will power the cellular work. This is the third thing that I wanted to tell you about this slide.